The Awakening. The Galactic Unity Assembly floated in the darkness between solar systems, a magnificent structure of crystalline spires and flowing energy fields that had served as the center of interstellar diplomacy for over 5,000 years. Inside its main chamber, representatives from 63 different species gathered in a space so vast that artificial gravity generators worked overtime to keep everyone oriented in the same direction. The air shimmered with countless translation fields, converting the whistles, clicks, hums, and melodic tones of alien languages into comprehensible speech. Ambassador Dr. Maya Chen sat in the human delegation section, her dark eyes studying the chaos unfolding before her. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with streaks of gray threading through her black hair, a gift from 2 decades of navigating impossible diplomatic situations. Her face remained perfectly neutral, betraying none of the frustration building inside her chest. Around her, the chamber erupted in what the assembly optimistically called vigorous debate, but what Maya recognized as organized chaos with a fancy title. The subject consuming everyone's attention was the Zorathian Collective, an empire of reptilian warriors who had spent the last 15 years carving a bloody path through the outer sectors. The Zorathians stood nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that shifted between deep crimson and burnished gold depending on their mood. Their 4 arms ended in clawed hands capable of crushing steel, and their yellow eyes held an unsettling intelligence that made them far more dangerous than simple brutes. They were conquerors by culture and philosophy, believing that strength determined worth and that the weak existed only to serve the strong. 3 weeks ago, the Zorathians had attacked the Lunari colonies on the twin moons of Epsilon Shade. The Lunari were a gentle species, resembling Earth's dolphins if dolphins had evolved to walk on land and develop a society based on music and mathematical harmony. They had no military to speak of, no weapons beyond basic defense systems, and no concept of the kind of brutality the Zorathians brought to their peaceful worlds. The attack had been swift and merciless. 4 million Lunari had died in the first day. By the end of the week, the twin moons were silent, their cities burning, their people gone. The Galactic Unity Assembly had been meeting every day since then, and in those 3 weeks, they had accomplished absolutely nothing of value. "We must issue a formal condemnation," declared Ambassador Thelvas, a member of the Etherian species who resembled impossibly tall, graceful birds with feathers that sparkled like starlight. The Etherians were one of the oldest members of the Assembly, and they carried themselves with the absolute certainty that their age granted them wisdom. Economic sanctions combined with diplomatic pressure will force the Zorathians to negotiate. Maya almost laughed. Almost. She had heard variations of this same speech for 3 weeks straight. The Etherians lived for 800 years on average, which meant they had plenty of time to wait for their diplomatic solutions to maybe, possibly, eventually work. The Lunari didn't have that luxury. Neither did the dozen other species currently under Zorathian threat. "Sanctions take years to have any effect," rumbled Ambassador Croth, representing the Stonebind Collective. The Stonebind were massive creatures of living rock and crystal, slow to move but incredibly strong. "The Zorathians will simply take what they need from conquered worlds. They do not care about trade with us." "Then we increase the pressure," Thelvas insisted, his feathers ruffling with agitation. "We expand the sanctions. We freeze their assets. We refuse them access to assembly space." "They already ignore assembly space," pointed out a representative from the Quicksilver Communion, a species of liquid metal beings who communicated through ripples and waves in their bodies. "They go where they want. They take what they want. Your sanctions are words written on water." The debate continued in circles, the same arguments repeated with slight variations, different voices saying the same useless things. Maya had watched this pattern in conflicts across the galaxy for 2 decades. The Assembly was very good at talking. They could debate for months, form committees that would study issues for years, and pass resolutions that sounded impressive but changed nothing. What they could not do was act with decisive force when action was needed. She thought about the report she had received that morning through secure channels. The Zorathians were mobilizing their fleets again. Intelligence suggested they were preparing to strike at the Whisper Worlds, a cluster of planets inhabited by the Melodians, a species whose entire civilization was built around the concept of harmony. They were even less prepared for war than the Lunari had been. If the pattern held, 5 million Melodians would be dead within a week of the Zorathian attack. Ambassador Chin, the Assembly Coordinator said, pulling Maya from her thoughts. The Coordinator was a being of pure energy contained within a geometric matrix of light, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. Humanity has been unusually quiet during these proceedings. Does Earth have a position on the Zorathian situation? Maya stood slowly, feeling every eye in the vast chamber turned toward her. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Unity Assembly for only 23 years, barely a heartbeat in assembly terms. The other species had studied Earth for a full century before making contact, trying to understand these strange creatures from what their scientists had classified as a Class 9 death world. Earth was a nightmare planet by galactic standards. Its atmosphere was corrosive to most species, filled with oxygen at concentrations that were literally toxic. Its weather patterns included storms that could flatten cities, temperature extremes that ranged from boiling to freezing, and natural disasters that struck with terrifying regularity. The native life had evolved in an arms race of predator and prey that produced creatures of stunning lethality. Even the plants were dangerous, many of them poisonous, some of them carnivorous. Yet humans had not just survived this hostile world. They had thrived. They had climbed to the top of the food chain, built civilizations, created art and music and literature, and eventually reached for the stars. When the assembly finally made contact, they found humans to be curious, creative, and surprisingly peaceful. Sure, human history was soaked in blood, full of wars and conflicts that had nearly destroyed them several times. But they had learned from those mistakes. Modern humanity seemed to have put violence behind them in favor of exploration, discovery, and cooperation. The assembly had decided humans were safe to invite. Strange, certainly. Their death world had given them unusual physical capabilities and a psychological resilience that bordered on the disturbing. But they appeared to be a peaceful species who had grown beyond their violent past. The assembly welcomed them as junior members, expecting them to learn the proper ways of civilized species. What the assembly didn't understand was that humans hadn't become peaceful because they had forgotten how to fight. They had become peaceful because they had become so horrifyingly good at war that they had frightened themselves into stopping. The Zarathian collective has committed genocide against the Lunari people, Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation fields. 4 million innocent beings were murdered. Not in battle. Not in conflict. They were slaughtered because the Zarathians knew this assembly would do nothing meaningful to stop them. Ambassador Chin, Thelvas said, his tone taking on a lecturing quality. We understand your frustration, but civilization cannot be built on violence. We resolve conflicts through dialogue and mutual understanding. That is what separates us from barbarians. The Zarathians understand one thing, Maya replied quietly. Power. They expand because they are strong and you are not. They kill because they can and you will not stop them. You have been talking for 3 weeks. How much longer will you talk while they prepare to murder 5 million Melodians? The chamber erupted in shocked chirps and whistles. Several representatives began speaking at once, their voices rising in protest. What would you have us do? Demanded an ambassador from the Singing Stones, a species of sentient minerals. Launch a military campaign? Become conquerors ourselves? We left such brutality behind millennia ago. You left responsibility behind, Maya said, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. You created this assembly to maintain peace, but you have no mechanism to enforce that peace. You can only talk. The Zarathians learned this long ago. That is why they do whatever they want. And what would humanity do? Thelvas asked, his feathers flattening against his body in a sign of deep offense. You come from a violent world with a violent history. Would you throw human lives away in a futile attack? The Zarathians have 6,000 warships. Earth has 47. Even your death world strength cannot overcome such numbers. Maya looked at the Etherian for a long moment. Then she smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret, someone who had seen what was coming and knew that everything was about to change. Humanity doesn't make futile gestures, she said softly. When we commit to action, we commit completely. You asked what we would do. You're about to find out. She touched a small device embedded in her wrist, a subtle gesture that went unnoticed by most of the assembly. The message it sent was brief, just 2 words that traveled faster than light back to Earth, to a facility buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice where Earth's Strategic Command maintained its headquarters. Authorization confirmed. On Earth, in that frozen bunker, Admiral James Okafor read the message and felt his stomach tighten. He was a veteran of Earth's peacekeeping forces, a man who had spent his entire career hoping this day would never come. But he was also a pragmatist who had spent the last 23 years preparing for exactly this scenario. He knew what humans were capable of. He knew what they had been in their past and what they could become again if circumstances demanded it. He opened a secure channel to every human military installation in known space. The message was simple, the authorization code ancient, chosen because it represented the point where diplomacy ended and action began. Protocol Terminus is now active. All units proceed to designated targets. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Objective: complete strategic elimination of Zarathian military capability. Timeline: 72 hours. This is not a drill. Across human space, ships that had been hidden in the darkness between stars received their orders. They were not like the Assembly's vessels, which were built for exploration and trade with weapons added as an afterthought. These were human warships, designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other before they finally learned to stop. They were fast, silent, and utterly lethal. Stealth satellites positioned throughout Zarathian space over the past 2 decades activated their full sensor suites. They had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, gathering information, mapping military installations, tracking fleet movements, cataloging every strategic asset the Zarathians possessed. The intelligence gathered over those years was now compiled, analyzed, and distributed to strike teams that had been training for this exact mission. Back in the assembly chamber, the debate continued. They had moved on to discussing the formation of a special committee to study the Zarathian problem. This committee would need 6 months to prepare a comprehensive report, which would then be reviewed by another committee, which would eventually make recommendations to the full assembly. In 2 years they might have a strongly worded letter ready. Maya sat down and said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn what happened when you pushed a Death World species too far. They would learn that humans had stopped fighting each other not because they had become peaceful, but because they had become so efficient at war that they had made it obsolete among themselves. The Zarathians were about to learn this lesson first. They would not survive the education. The revelation. The first reports arrived during what the Assembly had optimistically labeled a breakthrough session. They had been debating for 6 hours straight and had finally agreed on the wording for a resolution condemning Zarathian aggression. Several ambassadors were congratulating themselves on this monumental achievement when the emergency alerts began flashing across every display in the chamber. Ambassador Thelvas was in the middle of a speech about the triumph of diplomacy when his assistant rushed to his side, whispering urgently in his ear. The Aetherian's feathers went rigid, his eyes widening in shock. Around the chamber, similar scenes played out as representatives received urgent communications from their homeworlds and intelligence networks. The Zarathian military command post on Kuruk Prime has stopped transmitting, announced the assembly coordinator, their geometric form pulsing with agitation. All communication has ceased. Investigation vessels are being dispatched. Maya sat quietly in her seat, her expression neutral. She knew what the investigation vessels would find. Nothing. Where there had been a massive military installation housing 12,000 Zarathian soldiers and officers, there would be empty space and a crater on the planet's surface. No wreckage. No bodies. No evidence of conventional weapons. Just absence where something had been. This must be a technical malfunction, Thelvas said, though his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps their communication array failed. 3 more Zarathian installations have gone silent, the coordinator reported, their light form flickering rapidly. These are spread across different sectors, thousands of light years apart. This cannot be coincidence. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Then the theories began flying. Equipment failure. Coordinated sabotage. Perhaps internal rebellion among the Zarathians themselves. Nobody wanted to acknowledge what was becoming increasingly obvious. Over the next 8 hours, 17 Zarathian military bases simply ceased to exist. Investigation teams sent to the sites found the same thing at each location. Nothing. The bases had been erased from existence with such precision that there was no debris field, no radiation signature, no energy residue. It was as if someone had reached down with a cosmic eraser and removed them from reality. The assembly called an emergency session. The chamber was packed with representatives and their staffs, everyone talking at once, voices rising in panic and confusion. The Zarathian ambassador, a massive warrior named Krethak whose scales glowed an angry crimson, stood at his delegation's position, his 4 arms gesturing violently as he roared his fury. "Someone is attacking the Dominion," he bellowed. "This is an act of war. We demand the assembly identify and punish whoever is responsible." The irony was completely lost on him. The Zarathians had been attacking others for 15 years, and the assembly had done nothing. Now they were victims and suddenly they wanted justice and swift action. "We are analyzing all available data," the coordinator said, trying to maintain order. "But the technology required for these attacks is beyond anything possessed by any known species. No ships were detected. No weapons fire registered. The installation simply stopped existing. Impossible. Krethak snarled. Someone must be using some form of stealth technology. Find them. Ambassador Chin, Thelvas said, turning to face the human delegation. His silver feathers were completely flat against his body, a sign of deep unease among his species. You warned us that humanity would act differently than we expected. Do you know something about these attacks? Every eye in the chamber turned to Maya. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of their stares, reading the mixture of fear, suspicion, and desperate hope on dozens of alien faces. They wanted answers. They wanted reassurance. They were about to get neither. Yes, Maya said simply. We know about these attacks. The chamber exploded in noise. Krethak took a threatening step forward, his claws flexing. You admit it? You admit the humans are attacking us? No, Maya replied calmly. I said we know about them. There is a difference. We know because we are conducting them. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, no one seemed to breathe. Even the translation field seemed to pause in shock. You cannot be serious, Thelvas whispered. You do not have the capability. Earth has 47 ships. The Zorathians have 6,000. This is impossible. Maya touched her wrist device, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed footage recovered from a Zorathian surveillance satellite, one of the few pieces of technology that had survived the attacks. The image showed a military base from orbit, massive and imposing, bristling with weapons and shields. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Then there was a brief distortion in space, barely visible, lasting less than a heartbeat. When it cleared, the base was gone. This is the only footage that exists of any attack, Maya said. Notice there are no ships visible. No weapons fire. No warning. The Zorathian installation existed and then it did not. You are asking the wrong question. This was not a battle. Battles require two sides fighting. The Zorathians were not fighting anyone. They were simply removed. What kind of weapon does this? Someone asked, their voice shaking with fear. You are still asking the wrong question, Maya said. This is not about weapons. This is about approach. You think in terms of battles, of defeating enemies and forcing surrender. Humanity thinks differently. We learned through thousands of years of warfare that the most efficient way to end a conflict is not to win battles. It is to make your enemy completely incapable of continuing the fight. Krethak roared, slamming his fists on the table hard enough to crack the crystalline surface. You speak in riddles, human? Did your species do this or not? Maya looked at him with cold, level eyes. 3 weeks ago, I stood in this chamber and told you the Zorathians had committed genocide. I told you they murdered 4 million Lunari. I told you they would not stop because this assembly only talks and never acts. The assembly voted to form a committee and draft another resolution. That was your choice. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humanity made a different choice. We sent a message. Not the kind written in diplomatic language that no one reads. A message written in fire and absence. A message that says, commit genocide and you will face consequences that diplomacy cannot save you from. You are talking about mass murder. An ambassador from the Singing Stones cried out. Tens of thousands of Zorathians have died. Military personnel, Maya corrected. Every installation we targeted was a military base, a command center, or a strategic installation. We did not strike civilian populations. We did not bomb cities. We removed military capability. There is a distinction. A distinction without meaning. Thelvas said, his voice rising. You have declared war on the Zorathians. You have doomed yourselves. They will crush Earth. Their fleet numbers in the thousands. Maya's smile was cold and sharp. Will they? As if on cue, new alerts began flashing across the displays. The assembly coordinator's geometric form pulsed rapidly, processing incoming data faster than their organic members could manage. The Zorathian Grand Fleet has mobilized, they announced. All 6,000 warships. They are moving toward human space. Their stated intention is to, they intend to destroy Earth as an example to the galaxy. Krethak's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. You have signed your own death warrant, humans? Our fleet will turn your pathetic death world into an asteroid field. You will learn what happens when inferior species challenge their betters. Your fleet is heading into a trap, Maya said quietly. What trap? Krethak sneered. You have 47 ships. We have 6,000. Even your death world strength cannot overcome such odds. You are correct, Maya agreed. Which is why we do not plan to fight fairly. She touched her wrist device again and the holographic display changed. It now showed a strategic map of human space, with the approaching Zarathian fleet clearly marked as a massive red cloud of contacts moving toward Earth's frontier systems. As the assembly watched, new contacts began appearing on the map, blue icons representing human vessels. But not 47. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. That is impossible, Thelvas breathed. Where did those ships come from? We have been building them for 20 years, Maya said simply. Hidden shipyards in deep space. Construction facilities in asteroid belts. Resource extraction from uninhabited systems. Did you really think humanity would join the galactic community without taking precautions? Did you truly believe we would make ourselves vulnerable to species like the Zarathians? You lied to us, someone said, their voice filled with accusation and fear. We omitted information, Maya corrected. There is a difference. You never asked how many ships we were building. You never inquired about our industrial capacity. You assumed we were weak because we were new. That was your mistake, not our deception. The map showed the Zarathian fleet moving deeper into human space, approaching a system humans had labeled Wolf 359. It was a nothing system, no habitable planets, no valuable resources, just empty space and a dying star. The Zarathians believed they were pursuing a fleeing enemy. They had no idea they were walking into a killing field. The engagement is beginning, the coordinator announced, and suddenly every display in the chamber switched to show live feeds from observation satellites positioned throughout the Wolf 359 system. The Zarathian fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, 6,000 warships arranged in combat groups that had conquered 17 species. They were disciplined, experienced, and absolutely confident in their superiority. Their ships were massive, some of them 5 kilometers long, covered in armor that could withstand nuclear detonations and bristling with weapons that could crack planets. They found themselves completely surrounded. Human ships dropped their stealth fields all at once, appearing from nowhere in a coordinated moment that must have taken years of planning to execute. The Zarathians had expected 47 vessels. They faced 4,000. And these were not the exploration ships the assembly was familiar with. These were warships, purpose-built for exactly this kind of engagement, and they moved with a precision and speed that seemed almost unnatural. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The Zarathians fired first, their massive energy cannons unleashing devastation that should have vaporized the smaller human ships. But human vessels did not fight the way the Zarathians expected. They did not form battle lines or try to match firepower. They moved like a school of fish, like a flock of birds, each ship seeming to know exactly where the others would be. They flowed through space in patterns that made no sense, dodging weapons fire that should have been impossible to avoid, turning at angles that should have torn their ships apart. And their weapons were terrifying in their efficiency. Human kinetic accelerators fired projectiles that traveled at significant fractions of light speed. These were not sophisticated energy weapons or exotic technologies. They were just metal rods accelerated to incredible velocities. Simple physics turned into devastating firepower. When a human round struck a Zarathian ship, it punched through shields and armor like they were not there, the kinetic energy transferring directly into the target's structure. One shot, one kill. That was the pattern that repeated across the battlefield. The Zarathians had never faced an enemy like this. Every species they had conquered fought predictably, trying to match strength with strength, throwing their ships into conventional battle lines. Humans fought like the apex predators they were, using speed and precision and overwhelming coordinated violence. They were not trying to win a glorious battle. They were trying to eliminate threats as efficiently as possible. The engagement lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 5,000 Zarathian warships had been destroyed. The humans had lost 63 vessels. The remaining Zarathian ships, barely 1,000 survivors out of the original 6,000, attempted to flee in all directions. Some made it back to Zarathian space. Others were hunted down by human ships that pursued them through faster-than-light jumps, something the assembly had believed was impossible. In the assembly chamber, the representatives watched in horrified silence. They had thought they understood warfare. They had thought they knew what violence looked like. They were learning they had been very, very wrong. This is not possible, Thelvas whispered, his voice broken. No species can fight like this. No one can be this efficient at killing. Maya turned to face him, and for the first time, her expression showed something other than cold professionalism. It showed sadness. Every species in this assembly evolved on worlds that were relatively kind to them, she said quietly. Your planets had abundant resources, mild climates, few natural predators. You developed philosophy and art and diplomacy because you had the luxury to do so. Earth was different. Earth tried to kill us every single day. We evolved in an environment where everything was trying to eat us, poison us, or crush us. We learned to be efficient killers because that was the only way to survive. She gestured at the displays showing the aftermath of the battle, at the debris fields that had been a fleet, at the cold efficiency of human warfare. You invited us to the assembly thinking we were strange but harmless. You thought our death world had made us tough but our culture had made us peaceful. You were half right. Our culture did teach us to value peace. But it was not because we forgot how to fight. It was because we became so terrifyingly good at war that we frightened ourselves into stopping. We agreed to never fight each other again because we realized we were too dangerous to ourselves. But you never agreed not to fight others, Kredhak said, and for the first time, there was fear in his voice instead of arrogance. No, Maya agreed. We never agreed to sit idle while genocidal empires murdered innocent species. We never agreed to let others commit atrocities while we watched and did nothing. New alerts began flashing. While the Zarathian fleet had been engaged at Wolf 359, human strike forces had hit targets across Zarathian space. Not civilian targets. Not population centers. Military installations, weapons factories, shipyards, command centers, research facilities. Every piece of infrastructure that allowed the Zarathians to wage war was being systematically destroyed. The attacks were surgical, precise, and utterly devastating. Human forces knew exactly what to hit and where. 20 years of intelligence gathering had given them a complete picture of Zarathian military capabilities. Now they were using that intelligence to dismantle those capabilities piece by piece. You are destroying our civilization, Kredhak said, and his voice held a note of something that might have been despair. No, Maya corrected firmly. We are destroying your military. Your civilization can survive without the ability to conquer others. Your people can live peaceful lives. But your empire, your military dominance, your capacity to commit genocide, that ends now. She touched her wrist device one final time, and a document appeared on every display. It was written in clear, simple language with no room for interpretation. These are the terms of surrender, Maya said. Total disarmament of all Zarathian military forces. War crimes trials for your leadership, including you, Ambassador Kredhak. Reparations to the Lunari and every other species you have harmed. Human peacekeepers will occupy your worlds for one generation to ensure compliance and help you build a society that does not depend on conquest. You have 72 hours to accept these terms. And if we refuse? Kredhak asked, though he already knew the answer. Then the Zarathian dominion will cease to exist, Maya said simply. Not your people. Not your culture. But your government, your military, your empire. All of it will be erased. You will be given the opportunity to rebuild as a peaceful species, or you will be removed as a threat. The choice is yours, but it is the only choice you will get. The assembly chamber remained silent. Every representative understood what they had just witnessed. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted in 4 hours of brutal, efficient combat. Humanity had revealed itself not as the curious, peaceful newcomers the assembly had welcomed, but as the most dangerous predator in known space. You have become the very thing you claim to oppose, Thelvas said quietly. You are using violence to enforce your will on others. How are you different from the Zarathians? Maya looked at him for a long moment before answering. The Zarathians chose to be conquerors. They chose to commit genocide. They had every opportunity to stop, and they chose expansion and murder instead. We did not seek this war. We did not want this responsibility. But someone had to stop them, and you would not. So we will. She began walking toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. Before she left, she paused and looked back at the assembled representatives. The galaxy is under humanity's protection now, she said. Not because we want power. Not because we seek to rule. But because we have the capability and the will to do what must be done. You can continue to debate and form committees and pass resolutions. But when those fail, when innocent people are threatened, humanity will act. We will not fight wars. We will erase threats. Completely. Permanently. Finally. And who protects the galaxy from humanity? Someone asked. Maya's smile was sad and tired. We do. We protect you from threats like the Zarathians. And we protect you from ourselves by never forgetting what we are capable of, by maintaining the discipline to use this power only when absolutely necessary. That is the burden Earth carries. That is why we tried to warn you. She left the chamber, leaving behind an assembly that would never be the same. They had learned what it meant to invite a death world species to sit at their table. They had learned that humanity's peace came with a price, And that price was absolute protection paired with absolute consequences. In Zarathian space, their leaders faced an impossible choice. Surrender completely or face extinction. Their 6,000-ship fleet had been reduced to scattered survivors in 4 hours. Their military infrastructure lay in ruins. Their empire, built over centuries of conquest, had been dismantled in less than a day. They chose survival. The Zarathian Dominion accepted humanity's terms. The galaxy had a new order, and at its center sat Earth, the death world species that did not fight wars. They simply ended them.